small town of Hampton, Arkansas. I'm actually not from the United States. I was born in Ireland, as it says, in 1820. And my parents immigrated over to Brooklyn, New York when I was a small child. Now, unfortunately, my parents passed away when I was young, so I was forced to raise myself. I kind of traveled along the country till the outbreak of the Mexican conflict. And I found myself down in New Orleans. Down in New Orleans, I went and I enlisted in the United States Army. I got to fight under some great leaders during the Mexican War. I got to fight under General Zachary Taylor, who was later the President of the United States, and General Robert E. Lee, who was later the commanding general of the Army of Northern Virginia and Confederate forces during the American Civil War.
My husband was cited 3 times for his bravery and gallant service during his Army career. Although none of these events measure up to his actions after the massacre of Mountain Meadow, he is known as the hero of Mountain Meadow, a title he certainly deserves. If it were not been for him, I would not be here today.
You know, I wouldn't consider myself a hero, only doing what was right and going and upholding the moral to bring these individuals, these children home. You know, my heart was hardened by war during the Mexican conflict, and I've seen many of men fall, friendly and enemy. And I never shed a tear, but when I saw the Mountain Meadow site in 1859, I couldn't do anything but get down on my knees and cry. Over 120 men and women, children, were shot down in cold-blooded murder. Out of the 120, there was only 17 small children that survived.
Fortunately, I was one of those 17 children. I am told my life was spared because of a unique Mormon doctrine known as innocent blood. Any child under the age of 8 is considered innocent, and the killing of innocent blood does not allow for forgiveness in the world or the world to come, according to Mormon doctrine. You know, there were 17 of us that survived. All of us were under the age of 8. You know, I find it interesting 2 of the worst massacres that ever occurred on U.S. soil occurred both on September the 11th, only in different years.
Let me tell you a little bit about the wagon train and how it come and ended up in Utah at the Mountain Meadows Massacre site. It was to be the grand wagon train, the largest wagon train that ever traveled out during the North America expansion to the west. It would take the old Spanish Trail up to the Utah Territory into California. Now, it was led by Colonel Fancher and became known as the Baker-Fancher wagon train. It was very well provisioned. This was actually the third expedition through the Spanish Trail, the first 2 with no problem. It was well provisioned with food, with clothes, with weapons. They had a whole herd of cattle that was going to go with them on the trail. And matter of fact, Miss Sarah's whole family was on this wagon train. There were individuals from Johnson County, Arkansas, Carroll County, Arkansas, and even some families out of Missouri and Tennessee. Miss Sarah's family on the wagon train consisted of her mother, her father, her aunt, and her uncle. She had 5 sisters, a brother, and 10 cousins. So it was a pretty good sized family. Now this was it was a long journey, and so they decided that they needed to take a break, and they knew that Cedar City, Utah Territory, there was a small stream called Mountain Meadow. So they took a break there to rest up for the final leg of their journey into California. Now what happened on the 4th day on September 11th, well, 3 days prior to that when they were rested up until September 11th was disturbing. They were attacked by 60 individuals. Now these 60 individuals were disguised as Indians. There were some Indians in the group, some Indians of the Southern Peyote tribe that were native to the area, but most of these individuals were Mormons, disguised as Indians. And they were under the direction of John D. Lee, who led that particular group, guided by the leader of the Church of Latter-day Saints, Brigham Young. And what he had said was that take and cut the root of the tree of sin and iniquity, which means that anyone that comes in our territory that is not of our religion is to be killed. And so they unjustly attacked the wagon train on September 11th and September the 4th, and they stampeded all the cattle. But what they didn't realize is that these individuals on the wagon train would fight back. So they circled the wagons and they fought for 3 long days, neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Well, they knew that the wagon train her father or uncle, they knew that they couldn't hold out long. They didn't have any food. They hadn't had any water. So they were waiting. But on the other side, the Mormon leaders thought that they knew that they were white men instead of Indians. So they come up with this treacherous and cowardly plan. They said, let's go ahead and let's wave the white flag of surrender. So that's what the Mormons did. They waved the white flag. And Miss Sarah's sister, Mary Dunlap, she comes out in a white dress with a handkerchief, and they come and they meet in the middle, and they talk about terms of surrender. So the Mormons say, well, here's what we'll do. You lay down all your weapons, and we'll bring you out. We'll tell the Indians, these savages, that you're no threat to them, and we'll lead you out of hostile country back on the Spanish Trail, and you can continue your journey into California. So they decided, well, you know, we're out of food, we're out of water, this is the best thing. So they laid down their weapons, and what happens next is undescribable. They bring everyone out about 5 o'clock in the evening on September 11th, and they separate the men from the women and the children. And when they get them out away from the wagon train, they turn the rifles on the men and they kill them in cold blood. But once they do that, they turn the rifles on the children and the women, and they shoot them down. So you have over 120 individuals now laying out. To make this look like a savage Indian attack, they go up and they stab the body with arrows, and they cut their throats, slash their faces so that they're completely disfigured and unrecognizable.
My sister Rebecca was hiding behind a sagebrush during the attack. I had two older sisters that were shot and killed, and they lay dead right before her. I was only 1 year old at the time, and I was in my mother's arms, but my mother was dead also. So Rebecca ran from her hiding place behind the sagebrush. She grabbed me and pulled me to safety. We remained there until a white man named Jacob Henley come along and took us with him. We went to his home with 17. There were 17 of us all together. But the next day, the Mormons came and took all but 3 of us. The 3 of us remained with Jacob Henley, but we didn't stay at Mountain Meadows for very long. We left with him and went to the fort of Santa Clara. We remained there for 2 years, and I'm told, because I was only 1 at the time, my sister tells me that we were half clothed, half fed, and partially treated during this time.
You know, it's 1859 at this time. This is 2 years after the actual the massacre of the wagon train. 17 children are still held in captivity against their will. The Army's made several attempts. They've sent a couple small companies out to regain the children with no success. And so, you know, I went to them as a captain. I said, hey, you give me a company and I'll go rescue these children and I'll bring them back. And they denied that. They said, we're not going to do that. And I said, fine, you're not going to do that. I pulled out my sword, I slammed it on his desk, and I said, I resign my post. And I left the Army. I wasn't going to be a part of something that wouldn't go. And then I demanded they allow me to enlist volunteers to go and rescue these children. And so the commander, post commander did that. And I went and I found 51 individuals to go with me, along with the help of Jacob Corney. We headed off the Mountain Meadow Massacre. And I didn't expect to see what I saw when I got there in 1859. I got there, and there were, the bodies were not buried, they were ravaged by wild animals. What was on the ground, I could have gathered up hair from those and filled up several bushel baskets. There were leg bones and arm bones, children's skulls. It was totally a sickening sight. And so I took those individuals with me, and I said, well, I tell you what, this is a non-negotiable adventure. We're not going to negotiate. We're going to get these children back. And so we went to the Hamling, went to Jacob Hamling's house. And I walked inside. When we went inside, and I took my pistol and I pointed it at his head, and I looked him in his eyes, and I said, produce them or I will kill you. And he understood that I meant exactly what I said, and so he gave us the 13 children back, and he gave us the whereabouts of the other 3. We went, we got the other 2, and then on our way back through Fort Leonard Wood, we picked up the final remaining of the 17. Now, when we received these children back, we didn't expect to see again what we saw. We saw children that were half clothed, some not even half clothed. They were filthy, dirty, malnutrition, their eyes sunk back in their head, their ribs showing. They were in no condition to travel back east to home. So we took about 3 days, and we made them clothes, and we fed them, and we cleaned them, and we got them ready for the journey. and then we headed back into Arkansas. So we went back through Fort Leonard Wood into Arkansas, into Carrollton, Arkansas, and give these children back to their respective family members. Now after that happened, I left, resigned the Army, and I went to South America. I spent 32 years in South America running my own mining company. And at the end of that 32 years, I decided to retire and come back to the United States. And the first place that I went was back to see the children of Mountain Meadows that were raised by their uncle, James Dunlap.
Gunfire from the massacre resulted in my blindness, and I never regained use of my arm that was almost severed by gunfire. Although I was fortunate that when I returned to Arkansas, I was able to attend the School for Blind out of Little Rock. After that, I come back to Calhoun County and stayed here with my sister, Rebecca. Years later, I heard that James had become seriously ill, and so even though I was blind, I decided to write to him and offer to care for him. I felt like I deserved it to him. To my amazement, he fully recovered. He retired, and then he'd come back to visit us. It was during this visit that him and I fell in love. He was 74 and I was 38, although age didn't matter to us. We opened a store and run a little store outside of Woodbury, and I was fortunate enough to be able to teach Sunday school. Although we never had children of our own, we had many of the rascals come visit us every day after school. They never tire of hearing the stories of the massacre and how we came to settle here.
You know, the Mountain Meadow Massacre is a big part of Arkansas history, but a sad part of Arkansas history. But you'd like to know that there was some justice served for the individual that initiated the attack. John D. Lee, who started it, was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death and hung in 1877. Me and Miss Sarah, we lived a life together here in Calhoun County until she passed in 1901. And I placed her here with this ornate monument. I planted a bridal wreath that showered white flowers every spring.
You know, it was 9 years later before James died, and the Masons conducted his funeral, and they say the likes of which have never been seen in these parts since. He rested in an unmarked grave until 1998, when the Arkansas State Society of Children American Revolution dedicated this monument in his memory.
Well, we thank you for coming to Hampton Cemetery today. There's a wealth of information here and history of Calhoun County and Hampton, Arkansas, and we hope you come back to see us again next year.